America is hurtling towards an election which could lead to a disputed result and even violence on the streets. Tonight, we have extraordinary revelations of how Donald Trump won the White House the first time. Our investigations team has exclusively obtained a huge cache of secret data which reveals how the Trump campaign gathered and analyzed personal information on almost 200 million voters. It exposes how they identified and classified millions of Americans into audiences they could then target on social media, in particular Facebook. The crucial one we focus on tonight was the group called Deterrence, the people the Trump campaign knew they couldn't convince and therefore wanted to stop from voting at all. 3.5 million of them were black voters, so black people were disproportionately represented in that group. Tonight, leading civil rights activists have compared this to decades of black disenfranchisement, saying this is digital voter suppression. They have called on Facebook to disclose what the campaign did and when. The social media giant has refused, but insists what happened 4 years ago couldn't happen today. In this most divisive of elections, I've been to the crucial battleground state of Wisconsin to find the people on the Trump database who were marked for deterrence and to find out if the Trump strategy to stop them from voting worked. There is a reckoning taking place in the United States over racism, and for many it is the central issue in the election campaign. For months, people have taken to the streets across the country to protest against police brutality and structural racism in America.
These are anarchists, these are agitators, they're rioters, they're looters, they're bad people.
Donald Trump has long been accused of ignoring the voices of millions of black Americans. Now we can reveal how he has actively tried to silence them. We've obtained the database used by Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, a vast collection of files on almost 200 million US citizens. It shows what they knew and what they did, the secret tactics that helped turn Donald Trump into the president. How they split millions of Americans into different categories that could be micro-targeted with tailored ads on Facebook and other media, and categorized 3.5 million black Americans for deterrence in the hope they wouldn't turn out to vote at all.
That is mind-boggling. Somebody has worked this hard to strategically disenfranchise you.
You know, we're in a world of data, but it's how the data is used, manipulated, and then the platform allowing for this to happen, which fundamentally to me is a slap in the face for every single voter.
It was a strategy that preceded a collapse in the black vote in key states like Wisconsin that clinched the Trump victory. It may seem hard to believe, but Donald Trump's path to the White House actually passed right along Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive here in North Milwaukee. Now, this is not Trump country, but 4 years ago, tens of thousands of normally Democratic-supporting black voters just didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton. And now we can reveal for the first time that many of them had been identified and targeted by the Trump campaign and its supporters. Their aim, not to win their votes, it seems, but to get them to stay at home on election day. The database is a truly extraordinary insight into the workings of a modern-day political campaign.
It's called America First. Remember that.
For millions and millions of voters, highly personal information was bought, harvested, and used, all perfectly legal under America's data laws. They knew whether you're likely to own a dog or a gun, whether you're likely to get married or planning a baby. There was even a score for personality type. A colossal data set of more than 5,000 tables with nearly 5 terabytes of information. But it's not just what they knew about individual people, it's what they did with all the data, running it through a series of models and algorithms to try to understand how people act and think and might respond to certain messages. The campaign took all this information and used it to divide the country into different groups. In 16 key battleground states, the algorithm placed voters into one of 8 categories. Most likely to turn out was the base, Core Trump on his side, core Clinton on hers. Those least likely to vote were marked as deadbeats and then disengaged for both sides. In the middle were the voters who might go either way and were open to persuasion. But also crucial were these two segments. On his side, they were called GOTV, Get Out the Vote, and on the other, Deterrence, voters who might be encouraged not to vote. The campaign would then create ads that could be targeted at the people in these groups through Facebook and other platforms. Many were dark posts, which could appear on people's Facebook feeds and then vanish.
Cambridge Analytica can help you run more cost-effective...
This machine was built, in part, by a team from the now notorious company Cambridge Analytica, working hand in glove with a team from the Republican National Committee. What we found is that in those crucial swing states, black voters were disproportionately categorized for deterrence. In Georgia, they made up 32% of the population, but 61% of deterrence. In North Carolina, 22% of the population, but 46% of deterrence. And in Michigan, 15% of people, but 33% of deterrence. In total, more than 3.5 million black voters were marked for deterrence. If you include other ethnic minorities, they made up 54% of the deterrence segment. With its mix of Rust Belt, industrial areas, and rural farming communities, Wisconsin was one of Trump's key targets. But Milwaukee, with its big black population, has always been a Democratic stronghold. The black population of the whole state seems to live here.
Yeah, about 70% of blacks who live in the state of Wisconsin live in the city of Milwaukee.
Reggie Jackson grew up in the city.
The Democratic Party in particular takes for granted that black people are going to vote on the Democratic ticket every time, right? One of the things that Hillary Clinton did, a big mistake she made, I think, in 2016, she campaigned in Wisconsin in April and never came back the rest of the year, right? And so a lot of people were very upset by that.
On Election Day 2016, something unusual happened. Turnout among black voters in Wisconsin collapsed by 19%.
CNN now projects that Donald Trump will carry the state of Wisconsin. He will win Wisconsin with its 10 electoral votes. He's cracked the so-called blue wall that Hillary Clinton had tried to create.
The margin of victory in the state, just 23,000 votes. Afterwards, Donald Trump boasted that black voters had helped him to win.
And I'd say, what the hell do you have to lose, right? It's true. And they're smart, and they picked up on it like you wouldn't believe. And you know what else? They didn't come out to vote for Hillary. They didn't come out.
The collapse in turnout here in Milwaukee's poorest neighborhoods helped tip the whole state for Trump. A lot of that collapse was blamed on a new law passed by Wisconsin's Republican administration requiring valid voter ID to take part in the election. People argued that that was voter suppression because it disproportionately affected the poorest places. What nobody realized at the time was that by using the database, the Trump campaign could actually identify individuals on these streets who might be deterred from voting. Like other states, black voters in Wisconsin were disproportionately marked for deterrence. They made up just 5.4% of voters, but 17% of the deterrence group. More than a third of black voters in Wisconsin were classified as deterrence. Contrast that with the voters the Trump campaign thought he could win over. 75% of them were white, but less than 2% were black. We've come here because we've identified exactly how many people were marked for deterrence by the Trump campaign, and using the public voter roll, we've been able to match them and work out how many of them stayed at home. Take Ward 116. The Trump campaign was aware of 1,440 potential voters here. 80% were black. Almost half, 44% of the ward, was marked for deterrence. That's 636 people. So how many of those black deterrence voters actually turned out on election day? We went through the records. It was just 36%. Overall turnout in the precinct fell from 75% in 2012 to just 56% in 2016. And this wasn't restricted to one ward. Take these two back-to-back streets in Ward 111. 147 people were marked for deterrence by the Trump campaign, and on voting day, just 60 of them turned out to vote. Many of them had voted for Obama in 2012, but this time they stayed at home. One of them was Annette Clinton. So this is what the file said about you. So that's you, isn't it, Annette Clinton?
Yes, that's me.
That's your address?
That's correct.
Now it says you're a nurse's aide.
That's
or orderly.
correct.
It said your income at the time in 2016 was between $25,000 and $35,000.
That's correct.
That's correct. And that you were a renter.
Yes, that's correct too.
So they had you down pretty well.
So far,
How do you feel about the idea that the Trump campaign categorized you and lots of other people as deterrents?
I don't feel right by that at all, because they shouldn't have to categorize no one in order to get votes.
Black people were disproportionately represented. There were many more black people on that list than there should have been, proportionally. What do you think that tells you?
That the black community is targeted. You know, it shouldn't be like that, that they would use you and categorize you to make it harder for you to vote.
Does knowing this change anything about how you feel about the last election?
It makes me want to go out and vote more, actually.
There were Annettes in street after street. In Ward 111, 41% of identified voters were marked deterrents. Turnout fell from 81% in 2012 to 55%. In Ward 147, 40% were marked for deterrence. Turnout plunged from 83% in 2012 to just 63%. In Ward 109, 39% were marked for deterrence. Turnout fell from 79% in 2012 to 59% in 2016.
Wow.
Bridget and Tamara were also marked for deterrence. What do you remember about the 2016 election and your feelings about voting back then?
Well, actually, I didn't vote. I really actually never vote.
It turns out that both of you were on a list held by the Trump campaign in which they profiled people
Yeah.
who lived in these areas, and they had you down to be deterred from voting.
Yeah.
They didn't want you to vote.
Yeah, and that's very wrong because you're prejudging people. And I'm very upset about it because you're categorizing me and you're saying who I am in your eyes, and I'm really no one because you're already saying I can't make up my own mind.
Well, should we have a look at what they
Yes.
thought they knew about you?
Yeah.
Is that your birthday?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Mhm.
And that's your address?
Yes, it is.
So this is you we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, then when it comes to your personality, it says you're not very open as a person.
I'm very open. Most
You're
people
very
are very
open.
much like me.
A lot of people.
I make first impressions very good on the first.
What do you think about the fact that they hold this kind of...
I think they're
Information.
wrong because I think that what they need to do is meet the individual.
They used to have you down as a core Clinton supporter. They thought that you would definitely support Hillary Clinton. And then they moved you into a group of people who they thought could be deterred.
No.
What do you think about the idea that people can be deterred from voting in a democracy?
That's sad. That's bad. And they got to do something about it.
Disengage, deterrence, a lot.
Lena Taylor is a Democrat and a state senator from Milwaukee. Well, we can look here, for example, at Ward number 160.
Yeah.
And what we have here is the names and addresses of all those people and how they were segmented But what's really interesting is that a huge number of these names were marked down for deterrence.
So they specifically looked at those individuals and said, we are going to do everything to try to deter them and create ads that would do that. That is a strategic level that by no means did I know was existing. That is mind-boggling. I'm like shocked that they had in 2016 all the way down to we need to deter that one. Somebody has worked this hard to strategically disenfranchise you, to discourage you. What it should tell people is the power, right, of their vote.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
Clinton already had baggage with black voters. Her historical comments on black youths were weaponized to damage her further.
No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Super predator messages were pumped across the airwaves, the internet, and into black communities. We've discovered the campaign spent $55,000 targeting the message at black voters in the state of Georgia alone. Manan Sabir was on the deterrence list and explained why he didn't vote.
In my heart during that time, my thoughts was that she was supporting black men going to prison.
I mean, let me show you one of the commercials, the Super Predators commercial.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
I suppose what it means is some of those commercials that criticized Hillary, they were targeted at you.
Oh, probably targeted all the way.
Isn't it possible that some of that advertising influenced you at the time?
It's possible that it influenced somebody, but it doesn't influence me. Like
you feel confident it wouldn't have done?
No, I'm almost like 100. I'm 100% sure.
Can you really be 100% sure that advertising doesn't influence you? I mean, we all say that, don't we?
We all.
We can't know what effect these ads had on each voter that saw them, but for the first time in 20 years, black turnout fell. Brad Parscale was Trump's digital director in 2016.
We didn't run any kind of suppression and/or campaigns in any way that ran to. I don't think we didn't run not a campaign. I believe I would say I'm nearly 100% sure we did not run any campaigns that targeted even African Americans.
Despite the color you was born with, here in America, the only colors that matter are the colors of the red, white.
We can't tell you how many messages were targeted at black voters or what was in them, because Facebook won't tell us. What we know is the Trump campaign spent $44 million on Facebook and pumped out almost 6 million different ads. The company claims it does everything it can to stop misinformation and voter suppression online, but they have chosen to keep the ads used in the 2016 campaign secret.
And my view is that if you can't run your own house, you certainly can't run the White House.
Young, female, and black, a key target for deterrence, according to the data.
There is so much at stake in this election, and that's why I'm supporting Hillary Clinton.
This ad wasn't from the official campaign, but an apparently independent political action committee, also run by Cambridge Analytica. What do you mean?
I just don't believe what I'm saying.
Okay, but you're an actress.
I'm not that good of an actress.
They have denied any illegal coordination and data sharing between the groups. This ad aired on TV in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Confidential campaign records also show Facebook was paid $19,000 to distribute it. We showed our findings to Jamal Watkins, Vice President of the NAACP, one of America's leading civil rights campaign groups.
The thing that's shocking / troubling about this, is that there's this category of suppression, that deterrence part. So we use data, similar voter file data, but it's to motivate, persuade, encourage folks to participate. We don't actually use the data to say who can we deter and keep at home. That just seems fundamentally, it's a shift from the notion of democracy. It's actually undermining inclusion and participation. It's not may the best candidate win at that point, it's may the best well-funded machine suppress voters and keep them at home, thereby rigging the election so that someone can win. When you think about suffrage for women, when you think about the Black community suffering from poll taxes, misinformation and disinformation in the early part of last century, we actually have wrestled with that and said, that's not right. That's not who we are as a country. So to translate that type of behavior onto a social media digital platform, it's the same thing.
What do you think of Facebook's role here?
I don't believe Facebook has fully disclosed their role and fully disclosed the types of ads that were run, who was involved, and literally how they may have been embedded in, say, the Trump campaign to make this all come to life. And so when you look at this type of research and this type of intel, it's not just egregious on a sort of fundamentally moral level, but it's egregious when it comes to a higher level of what it means to be a part of the American ethos. Facebook is a very profitable platform. It reaches, billions of folks every day. It doesn't need this kind of money, meaning if it were to monitor and check these suppressive ads and say this is not the platform for this type of misinformation, disinformation, suppressive tactics, Mark Zuckerberg would still live well and eat well.
What happened in 2016, of course, was not restricted to Milwaukee. We've found the same in Black neighborhoods from Miami to Atlanta, from Richmond to Cleveland. America's reckoning of Donald Trump will come in just a few weeks' time. In Milwaukee, campaigners are pouring their efforts into getting Black people to register to vote, determined that the very people the Trump campaign tried to deter from voting last time will make their voices heard in 2020.
I need you, Chief. Yeah. I need
Well, Facebook didn't deny any of the claims we put to them. They declined our request to publish the ads they disseminated in 2016 or provide any of the targeting information. Instead, they said, since 2016, elections have changed and so has Facebook. What happened with Cambridge Analytica couldn't happen today. They also told us we have 35,000 people working to ensure the integrity of our platform, created a political ads library, and have protected more than 200 elections worldwide. We also have rules prohibiting voter suppression and are running the largest voter information campaign in American history. Facebook also declined to put anyone up for interview, as they have done since our Cambridge Analytica investigation 2 years ago. The Trump campaign, the Republican National Committee, and the White House did not provide any comment. Well, last night, President Trump's former campaign manager, Brad Parscale, who you saw in my report, was taken to hospital for mental health treatment in an emergency. Police were called to his home in Florida by his wife. Parscale was demoted from the campaign manager's post in July, but remained part of the campaign, helping run its digital operation. Now, back in 2016, Pennsylvania was also one of the battleground states the Trump campaign took narrowly on its way to the White House. Our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, is live in Pittsburgh. Siobhan.
Well, Krishnan, this story, of course, isn't just about Milwaukee or indeed Wisconsin. I'm here in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, one of the crucial swing states, and where, in 2016, the data reveals almost 300,000 Black voters were placed on the Trump campaign's deterrence list. They made up nearly a third of all those targeted here, despite the fact Black voters are only 11% of the state's overall population. And just like in Wisconsin, the campaign targeted majority Black neighborhoods. Here in Pittsburgh, for example, in the suburb of Brushton, the campaign marked more than 2,500 people for deterrence, 88% of which were Black. And a quick look at Ohio across the border, where, of course, the first presidential debate is happening tomorrow night. The same number, almost 300,000 Black voters, were put in the deterrence category. Of course, the president and his campaign, as you've heard, has always categorically denied they targeted black voters. And he continues to claim now, just as he did back in 2016, that he is the best choice for the black community and that he's done more for them than any other president. But polling pretty consistently shows Joe Biden outperforming Donald Trump among black voters. The key question, of course, though, unlike 2016 and with the nation in the midst of a racial reckoning, will black voters turn out in any serious number to vote this time around? Well, for one, Joe Biden will certainly hope that they do.
Siobhan Kennedy in Pittsburgh. Well, earlier I spoke to Cornel West, who's a professor at Harvard and a political activist. Began by asking for his reaction to the findings of our investigation.
I think we shouldn't be surprised at all, though, brother. I mean, we are witnessing in real time the collapse of the American empire, and every empire, for the most part, at least most of them, undergo collapse owing to military overreach, corruption of elites, the cultivated helplessness of citizens, and then the inability to conceive of an alternative. So people end up grasping for, neo-fascist leaders, and Trump is a neo-fascist gangster. There's no doubt about that. And so we shouldn't be surprised. We just have to become more fortified in our fight against him and the forces behind him.
What we've seen here is how they use big data. And all sorts of political organizations are using big data. But is this a continuation of a long history in this country of trying to suppress black votes?
Well, I mean, the Black Lives Movement, which focuses on the degree to which the police have tried to suppress and contain working class and poor black folk especially. This is just a particular manifestation of it vis-a-vis the voting booth. Suppression, containment, and trying to cultivate helplessness, cultivate hopelessness. Thank God the movement that we're a part of is shattering that kind of sense of helplessness.
What do you think needs to be done about it?
Right now, the crucial thing is not so much identity, it's integrity and solidarity against white supremacy. And that cuts much deeper than a lot of the more narrow identity politics we're talking about. We're calling for all people of decency and integrity to stand for justice, including this kind of suppression in regard to the vote.
The tool that was used by this database to target voters with specific messages, ads that would make them be deterred from voting, was primarily Facebook. What is Facebook's responsibility here, and what should be done about that?
Well, that's a good question, because I tend to be a bit libertarian when it comes to allowing folk to have a right to be wrong, allowing folk to go about their own ways of sustaining their life projects. But once we start talking about trying to censor folk, the first ones oftentimes are progressives, black folk, brown folk, indigenous folk. So that's a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue. But I think if we cast a limelight on them, you would hope that they would be able to do the responsible thing without having to bring down governmental power on them.
On the simple morality of what was happening, if it's perfectly fine to campaign and target people to get them to vote, what's wrong with targeting and campaigning to get them not to vote?
Well, there's a certain harassment, there's a certain intimidation, there's a certain attempt to try to instill fear, and that is very much the history of white supremacy. So that sense, that campaign of fear is the thing that upsets me more than anything else.
Cornel West, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk now to Dr. Christopher Metzler. He's a Republican strategist who's worked on several campaigns, including Donald Trump's 2016 presidential bid. Dr. Metzler, how is the disproportionate targeting of 3.5 million black voters to try and get them to be deterred from taking part in the election democratic?
Well, it is, in my view, very democratic. I have no idea what Dr. West is talking about. Look, if a voter has its own responsibility to determine whether or not that voter's going to vote. Now, if the voter decides that there's some tactics that presses them not to vote, that says more about voter responsibility than it says about targeting. And look, these digital advertising, micro-targeting, that is now the way campaigns are currently working. I see nothing wrong.
But if it's totally
Absolutely.
legitimate, why was it kept secret?
Well, of course, any campaign would keep it secret. Of course they would. I mean, why would the campaign reveal its strategy? As a strategist, I would not allow them to reveal the strategy. But in my view,
Well, they didn't just keep it secretly. They denied it. They denied it was taking place.
Okay, and from my perspective,
that was a lie.
There is nothing illegal about what was done here. Zero. If people want to change that, then they need to change the law. Given the current state of the law, nothing illegal about what they did. And I'm sure the campaign is not the only one who has micro-targeted voters.
If you think, it's all fine and sort of all's fair in love and elections, the question is why you can't be more open about this then. I mean, do you think that the campaign should admit that when they denied that they were targeting black people, that they denied that they were running black voter suppression, they should now come clean and admit that they were, and that there's nothing wrong with it because it's not illegal?
Well, from the campaign standpoint, the campaign does what it believes is the best strategy. I will tell you, however, as a strategist currently running a campaign for the mayor of Baltimore City, I never reveal my strategy. So from my perspective, it's the campaign's choice. They decide what their strategy is. If people don't like that, and again, I go back to the very basic question. Voters need to inform themselves. And if they're being targeted with these ads, is that how they're making a decision to vote or not to vote? It seems to me they need to go back to basic civics.
As you know, off the back of a lot of history. There are decades of attempts to suppress black votes in this country, from intelligence tests and all sorts of qualifications to vote, to suppression campaigns in terms of black voter registration, threatening people with jail if they vote illegally, and then, of course, the voter ID laws as well. This all fits into a pattern that was going on in the run-up to 2016 to stop these black people from voting because you knew they wouldn't vote for Trump.
No, absolutely not. First of all, you don't know whether they would vote for Trump or not, number one. Number two, as it relates
you didn't
to
think they would. That's the point. You thought they should be suppressed.
Well, you just never know. And as it relates to some of the comparators you raised, issues of jail, poll tax, all of those kinds of things, this is an apples and oranges comparison. And I would say, as far as purging voter rolls, etc., several judges have ruled that, in fact, in particular states, they have the right to do so.
In that case, you would expect them to still be doing this. This will be a current tactic as well. And again, nothing wrong with this in your view.
I have no idea because I'm not working on the campaign currently, so I couldn't tell you. I have no idea.
Dr. Messer, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, our revelations are not the only major story that's broken about the president in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, the New York Times published President Trump's tax details amid allegations his empire is beset by losses. They claim the president paid just $750 in taxes, yet $750 in 2016. The president has hit back, saying it's fake news. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
We share one heart, one home, and one glorious destiny.
But not apparently one rule when it comes to paying taxes.
Welcome home, Mr. President!
In the year he became president, the New York Times says Donald Trump paid just $750 in federal income tax. And in 10 previous years, precisely zero.
Totally fake news. No, actually, I paid tax, and you'll see that as soon as my tax returns. It's under audit. They've been under audit for a long time. The IRS does not treat me well. They treat me like the Tea Party, like they treated the Tea Party. They don't treat me well. They treat me very badly.
His lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, peered round the podium. Presidents have declared their tax returns since 1971, but not this one.
Well, first of all, I paid a lot. And I paid a lot of state income taxes, too. The New York State charges a lot, and I paid a lot of money in state. It'll all be revealed. It's going to come out.
Back in 2015, he declared his candidacy from Trump Tower. It's long been suspected that he paid little or no federal income tax, but these documents provide much more detail. Mind you, as he said in his first debate, avoiding tax is just good business.
He didn't pay any federal income tax. So if he's paid zero, that means zero for troops, zero for vets, zero for schools.
Today, the Biden campaign released an ad comparing the president's tax payments to that of ordinary Americans, fodder for tomorrow's presidential debate. The president has continued to receive revenue from golf courses in Scotland and Ireland, while other income while in office has come from licensing deals in countries led by authoritarians where US diplomacy is fraught, according to the New York Times, $3 million from the Philippines, $2.3 million from India, and $1 million from Turkey. The documents suggest that the Trump Organization's real estate business frequently made losses, which he offset against profits from his reality TV show, The Apprentice. In 2008 and 9, he declared more than $1 billion in losses and received a tax refund of $72.9 million. The IRS has been investigating that for 10 years and may demand a refund, which with interest could total more than $100 million US. Today, the president inspected an endurance truck. The message, his policies create jobs. But whether or not he's out of one after the election, the documents say he has debts totaling more than $400 million. More potential losses, maybe, to write off against tax.
And Lindsay is with me now. What's going to be the impact of this?
Well, Christian, the Democrats are already producing bumper stickers saying, I pay more tax than Donald Trump. Now, obviously, it's not going to persuade hardcore Trump supporters, but some people voted for him last time because they thought he was a great businessman. When he lost hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not great business. And others who are losing their jobs now because of the pandemic, they may not be impressed with how little tax he appears to have paid. But I think it goes deeper than that. It's about democracy itself. I mean, the report that you've just done is about trying to stop people voting. That's against the real democratic system. The president's been talking for the last week or so about possibly not accepting the results of the election, saying that it's going to be rigged if he loses. Well, that's an assault on the democratic system. And this, paying tax, taxation, representation, that goes to the heart of American democracy. And I think many would see this as another stake through it.
Thank you, Lindsay. And with regard to the leak of the Trump campaign database that we have, obviously this is just day one of the conclusions we've been able to draw from how they operated. There's going to be an awful lot more to reveal. That's it from Washington for now. Over to John in London.